The wind moves differently in ancient places. It carries with it the scent of damp earth and the faintest trace of smoke that should have faded thousands of years ago. It sighs across stone and soil as if remembering voices no living ear will ever hear again. Long before the first cities rose from mud and stone, before kings claimed crowns, and before the first line of history was scratched into clay, there were nights. Endless nights beneath skies unspoiled by the glare of fire or lamp. Nights where the stars burned like ice against the black, sharp and eternal. And beneath those stars there were people. They gathered in the open, in valleys and on hilltops, in clearings where the forest parted like a curtain. They came barefoot, skin marked with ochre and ash, carrying offerings of bone, grain, and carved stone. They came not for each other, but for something greater, something unseen. No one today can say exactly what they asked for in those hours. Only the earth remembers, and the earth does not speak in words. Archaeologists call them ritual sites. Circles of standing stones, pits blackened with the remains of countless fires, and shallow graves filled not with bodies, but with objects, shells carried from seas hundreds of miles away, antlers polished to a shine, strange figurines with blank faces and exaggerated eyes. In the far north, on the windswept islands of Orkney, ancient hands dragged slabs of sandstone taller than a man and heavier than a herd of oxen. They planted them deep into the soil, aligning them with the points where the sun rose and set on the longest and shortest days of the year. No one knows exactly how or why they did it, only that the stones have stood for over 5,000 years waiting. Some believe these circles were calendars, marking the rhythm of the seasons. Others whisper they were more than that, gateways between the living and the dead, places where the air grew thin and the old gods could listen. Imagine it, a winter night, colder than bone, the moon hanging low and swollen, casting pale light across frost-hardened ground. Around the great stones, the people gather, wrapped in furs, breath rising in silver clouds. The elders stand nearest to the central fire, their shadows stretching impossibly long in the flickering light. They begin to chant. The sound is low at first, almost swallowed by the wind, but it grows, building in rhythm, as if the earth itself is breathing with them. Children huddle close to their mothers, eyes wide. Somewhere in the darkness, a drum begins to beat, slow and steady, like the pulse of something vast and unseen. An offering is brought forward, a carved figure, no higher than a man's hand, made of bone and decorated with red pigment. The figure is placed into the flames, and as the fire consumes it, the chant changes. It becomes sharper, almost urgent. What were they asking for? Good hunting? Safe passage through winter's grip? Protection from the shadow of sickness that could wipe away a whole family in a single moon's turn? We can never be certain. Some rituals left traces in ways we can still read. In a peat bog in Denmark, a woman was found lying face down in the dark, preserved by the earth as if she had fallen only yesterday. Her skin still clung to her bones, her hair still braided neatly. Around her neck was a leather cord. In her stomach, the remains of a meal of grains and seeds. She was not buried in the usual way. She was offered to the earth, perhaps to the gods, perhaps to the forces of the land itself. The people who left her there may have believed that only through giving life could they keep life. And she was not alone. Across northern Europe, bogs have given up bodies, men, women, even children, all placed there with care, sometimes bound, sometimes marked with wounds. Their deaths were not accidents. They were sacrifices. Far to the east, in the shadow of the Caucasus Mountains, archaeologists found a pit filled with the bones of animals, sheep, goats, and cattle, all killed in the same season, their skulls facing the same direction. At the center of the pit was a single human skull, placed upright, as though watching. The soil around the bones was rich with ash, and fragments of chard which suggested a great fire had burned there, one so hot it cracked the stones beneath. Somewhere in the darkness of prehistory, this place had been chosen for something more than survival. Here, life had been given over to the unknown. Even older than these are the great stone monuments that rise from the plains of Anatolia, carved in an age when humans had not yet discovered the wheel. At Göbekli Tepe, Massive pillars etched with lions, vultures, and abstract symbols stand arranged in circles, older than the pyramids, older even than most farming villages. There are no signs that people lived there. No homes, no storage pits, no tools for daily life. Only the stones and the carvings. Some scholars say this was the world's first temple, built not to shelter people, but to bring them together, to connect them with forces they could neither see nor name. It is a place where the past speaks only in symbols. A fox carved in relief may have meant cunning, or death, or the spirit of a hunter long gone. A vulture could be a guide for the soul. The meanings are lost, yet standing there among the stones, one can almost feel the weight of intent pressing in from every side. In every corner of the world, from the icy tundra to the sun-baked deserts, traces of these first beliefs remain. A burial mound shaped like a serpent, coiling in green hills. A line of stones pointing to where the sun bleeds into the horizon on the day when winter begins to die. Charcoal buried deep beneath the roots of a sacred grove, never disturbed until the modern age. We think of history as a story written in words, but for tens of thousands of years, it was told in firelight, in the alignment of shadows, in the offerings left where no one would ever find them again. And yet, somehow, we have found them. But for every fragment uncovered, there are 100 more still hidden, buried beneath centuries of soil and silence. Somewhere out there, under the roots of a forest or the shifting sands of a desert, the remains of another gathering wait to be seen again. A night of ritual that ended before the dawn, leaving only stone and bone to remember. The wind still moves across these places, whispering against rock, curling through grass. If you stand very still, in the right place, at the right moment, you might almost hear it, the echo of voices rising to the stars, and perhaps something answering. The night is heavy with the scent of wood smoke and damp soil, and the sound of footsteps, crunching over frost-hardened earth, carries far in the stillness. Figures move through the darkness, their shapes cloaked in furs and feathers, the glint of torchlight catching in their eyes. They are not speaking to one another, but the air between them hums with the weight of something shared, something ancient. Ahead a ring of stones waits silent and unmoving, yet somehow alive in the shifting glow of the fire at its heart. Shadows climb and fall across the carved faces of the monoliths, and the wind threads through them like a low voice speaking in a language no one remembers. Here the elders have gathered the youngest, stand at the edge, watching their faces pale in the firelight. A bundle is brought forward wrapped in animal hide bound with twisted fiber. It is laid before the flames and unwrapped to reveal a figure carved from a single piece of dark, wooded surface, smoothed by many hands. The figure is faceless, yet its presence is undeniable, as though it has watched these gatherings for longer than anyone has lived. It is lifted high so the firelight dances across it, and then set upon the ground in the center of the stones. The chanting begins low and deep, a rhythm older than the language of words. It is not music, but something heavier, each voice folding into the next, until the sound is no longer human. Somewhere beyond the edge of the light, shapes seem to gather, though no form can be seen. The fire flares high, and the wind shifts, carrying sparks into the sky, where they vanish into the black. In the far reaches of the Siberian steppe, a sight lies beneath centuries of snow and ice. When uncovered, it revealed a circle of pits, each filled with antlers, from reindeer, placed, with deliberate care, their points all turned toward the center. In that center lay the remains of a man buried with no weapons, no ornaments, only the skull of a great bear resting upon his chest. The ground around him was blackened as if by a fire that burned without consuming fuel. Some say he was a shaman, a walker between the seen and the unseen, his death a bridge to whatever world lay beyond the frost. Across the sea in the islands of Japan, a cave mouth gapes toward the waves. Inside, the walls are marked with hands pressed in red and black pigment, some small like those of children, others large and long-fingered. Beside them are shapes of fish, birds, and strange spirals, whose meaning is lost. Yet deeper in the cave, in the cold air untouched by light, there lies a hearth long cold, its stones still bearing the marks of tools that shaped them. This was no home, but a place where sea and sky and land met in a single point, a place where people came to speak to the forces that moved the tides and the storms. In the deserts of the American Southwest, the ancestral Puebloans built great kivas, circular chambers, sunk deep into the earth. Within them the air is cool, and still even on the hottest day. The walls bear faint traces of painted patterns, spirals, lines, figures of beings neither human nor animal. These were places of ceremony, of meeting with those who came before, and those yet to come. When the Spanish arrived, they found the kivas abandoned yet untouched, as if the people had simply stepped out and never returned. Even now some pueblos keep their ceremonies hidden from the eyes of outsiders, as if to guard the thread that ties them to the first fires. Far in the jungles of Central America, there are clearings where the ground is littered with fragments of obsidian blades and pottery. At the center stands a single stone altar stained dark by time and weather. The carvings show figures kneeling, their heads bowed before a rising sun. What offering was given here, the jungle does not tell, though some believe it was the lifeblood of warriors taken in battle. Others whisper it was the willing gift of those chosen to walk beside the gods into the world beyond. From the high cliffs of Ireland to the black volcanic shores of Polynesia, the shape repeats itself over and over. A gathering place open to the sky, a marker set in stone, the remains of fire and feast. No matter the distance, no matter the age, the rhythm is the same, as if all of humanity heard the same call and answered it each in their own way. In the great Rift Valley of Africa, where the bones of our oldest ancestors lie, the wind carries scents of grass and ash. Here, too, are circles of stone, small and unassuming, yet aligned with the rising of certain stars. These stones are older than writing, older than the pyramids, older than the stories passed from mouth to mouth. They are the breath of the first prayers, the shape of the first questions asked to the night sky. Some of these places hold more than memory. They hold a weight felt in the bones. Step into them, and the air changes. It becomes thick, as though the present thins, and something older presses close. Animals grow uneasy here, their ears flicking, their eyes restless. Some believe the earth remembers where it was touched by these gatherings, and that the touch never fades. There's one place in the shadow of a mountain where travelers speak of hearing voices when the wind moves in from the east. They say it is like a crowd gathered just beyond sight, murmuring in a tongue no living person understands. Those who have camped there alone tell of dreams filled with fire and shadow, and the faces of people they have never met. When they wake, the fire they built is nothing but ash, though no flame touched it in the night. It is easy to imagine that the stones and earth remember not only the rituals themselves, but the reasons for them. Fear of the dark, of hunger, of the unknown that walks on the edge of the firelight. Gratitude for the hunt, for the harvest, for the child born healthy and strong. The need to connect to something vast enough to give meaning to the small and fragile span of a single life. We live now in a world of walls and lights and voices that never cease. Yet somewhere deep within us, there is still that same pull toward the night sky and the open ground. We feel it when we stand alone in a silent place, when we see the full moon rise over a dark horizon. It is the echo of the first fires, the breath of the first chants, the whisper of the dawn of time, calling us back to listen. And if we were to answer, if we were to step once more into the circle and raise our eyes to the stars, perhaps we would find that the old gods are still waiting. And perhaps they have been listening all along. The air is thin here. Thin enough that each breath feels like it carries less than it should. Thin enough that your heartbeat feels louder than the wind. And yet the wind is loud. It scours the stone in long sighs, carrying with it the smell of ice and the faint dry taste of dust. It rattles across the frozen slopes of the Andes, where clouds trail low like slow-moving ghosts. And high above the last green valleys the world narrows to rock, snow, and sky. It is here that they came. Small figures in heavy woven cloaks moving in single file along the mountain spine. The sun burned hard by day, but the nights were sharp enough to bite the skin and stiffen the fingers. Their sandals scraped over loose stone, the sound of each step swallowed almost instantly by the open silence. At the front walked the priests. Behind them the children. They were dressed in garments bright with colors that had taken months to weave, dyed with cochineal reds and the deep yellow of mountain flowers. Gold gleamed at their necks and wrists. Their hair was braided with care, and their faces were painted with soft ochre. In their hands they carried bundles wrapped in fine cloth. Inside were carved figures of llamas and humans shaped from silver and gold. There were bowls of maize and dried fruit, leaves of coca wrapped like offerings to the wind. Every step brought them higher, where the air grew sharper, where the land itself seemed to lean into the sky. There was no path here, only the memory of one. And still they climbed. The Inca called it Capicocha, a ritual for the gods who lived in the mountains, in the sun, in the places where the clouds were born. It was not punishment, not exile, not cruelty in their eyes. It was an honor. The children chosen for this path were not taken by force. They were selected from noble families for their beauty and purity, untouched by sickness or flaw. Their parents wept, but they also bowed, for to give a child to the gods was to give the greatest gift possible. The journey could last weeks. From the heat of Cusco's stone streets to the cold ridges, where the world narrowed into white silence. At night they would rest in small shelters of stone. The priests whispered prayers into the darkness. The children listened. On the day they reached the summit, the clouds lay far below. The mountain's shadow stretched across valleys and lakes. Here the air was too thin for fire to burn long, so they lit small flames fed with dry grass and twigs carried up from the lower slopes. The children were given a final meal rich and sweet, maize cakes, coca leaves, chicha beer made from corn. Their eyes grew heavy, their breath slow. It was not the cold, not yet, but something else. A drifting into stillness. The priests placed them each in a small pit lined with cloth and offerings. They were seated cross-legged, heads bowed, hands resting on their knees. The snow began to drift down, covering bright fabric with white, and there they remained. Centuries later, when the snow gave them back, they were unchanged. One was a girl, her face serene, her hair still braided, her skin still smooth. In the folds of her clothing lay silver figurines and tiny bags of coca leaves. Her body had been preserved not by any human hand, but by the cold and the thin air. It was as if she had only just closed her eyes. Others were found nearby, each in their own place, each surrounded by the same careful offerings. Scientists would call them the Urayaco mummies, named for the mountain that had held them for more than 500 years. The Inca had called them something else. Children of the sun. Standing on that mountain, even now you can feel it. The air bites the skin, the silence feels endless. Every sound seems to vanish too quickly, as if something is swallowing it. You look down, and the valleys are far away, hidden beneath the white. You look up, and the sky seems impossibly close. It is easy to imagine the priests moving between the seated figures, their cloaks snapping in the wind. Easy to hear the low murmur of words carried into the cold sky. Prayers for rain, for the end of drought, for the health of an emperor, or the survival of a people. For the Inca, the mountains were alive. They were gods who could bless or destroy. They demanded respect and offerings. And the highest offering was life itself. When the archaeologists found the children, they worked in silence, their breath fogging in the cold. Every movement was slow, deliberate, careful, as though they feared to wake the sleepers. And in a way they did not. The children remained untouched by time, their faces peaceful, their lips closed, as though they were simply breathing slow. It is a strange thing to stand before someone who died 5 centuries ago and see no trace of decay, no mark of violence. Only stillness. The wind moves around them. It sounds like a whisper. The wind never rests here. It coils around the ridges, like an invisible serpent, carrying the sting of ice against the skin and the deep hollow sound of emptiness. And yet within that emptiness, there is a presence, something that presses against the edge of thought and lingers in the mind long after you descend the slopes of the mountain. Those who uncovered the children spoke of the strange stillness that fell over the camp, as if the air itself had grown heavy and reluctant to move. The snow crunched beneath their boots, but the sound seemed to sink into the ground instead of rising into the sky, and every breath was shallow, not only from the thin air, but from a weight that could not be explained. The figures sat as they had been placed 5 centuries earlier, the cloth of their garments intact, the colors dulled only slightly. By time their skin pale against the dark braids of their hair, there was no sign of struggle, no mark of fear upon their faces. Their eyes closed, their lips soft, the line of the mouth almost curved in a dreamlike calm. Around them lay the gifts for the gods, small llama figures of gold and silver beads carved from shell and stone, tiny pouches of coca leaves meant to give strength in the journey. After life, the arrangement was deliberate, each item placed with care, as if the position itself carried meaning known only to the priests who had stood here in the thin air of that final day. It is said the Inca believed the mountains could see and hear, that they could taste the offerings left upon their peaks, and that through such gifts balance could be restored when drought threatened the crops, or when disaster struck the empire. The people would look to the highest places and the highest offerings they could give. Capacocha was not a frequent ritual. It was reserved for moments of great importance: a coronation, a death of an emperor, a season when the rains did not come, or when the earth itself trembled. The children chosen were thought to be pure vessels, carrying the hopes and fears of the people into the realm of the gods. They were not seen as victims, but as messengers. Yet standing among the snow and stone, there is a question that stirs quietly like the wind in the folds of a cloak. Did the children understand where they were going? Did they know that the summit would be their last resting place? Or did they believe the priests who spoke of honor and divine purpose? The path they climbed was brutal, a thin line across ridges, where one misstep could end in a fall into white emptiness. Nights were spent in shelters of stacked stone, where the cold crept into the bones, despite the thick woven mantles carried from the valleys. Each morning the sun rose hard and clear, and each evening it sank behind peaks that seemed to pierce the very skin of the heavens. When they reached the final place, the air was so thin that even the strongest moved slowly, their breath loud in the stillness. Here the priests would perform the last rites, chanted words rising into the air like smoke before fading into silence. The children were given chicha, sweet and warm coca, to chew. Songs were sung, voices trembling not from fear, but from the cold that gnawed at fingers and lips. And then the snow began to fall. It fell in slow, drifting veils, settling over cloth, over skin, over gold. It softened the world until there was nothing but white. The fire burned low, the last chants were spoken, and the priests stepped back, leaving the children seated among the gifts, the snow covering them until they were one with the mountain. For centuries the wind moved across that slope, carrying only whispers of what had been, until one day it gave them back. The archaeologists who lifted the first child from her resting place found her body colder than the air around her, her limbs still pliable, her hair free of frost, as though she had been sitting there only moments before they felt the weight of her slight frame through their gloves, and the sight of her painted face, with its unbroken calm, made the mountain feel larger and emptier than before. Tests would later reveal traces of coca and alcohol in her system, likely enough to lull her into a deep sleep. But no sign of violence, no injury, no resistance, and yet beneath the calm of that knowledge was something harder to name, a sense that she was not merely preserved by the cold, but held by it. Even now those who visit the summit speak of the strange sensation that comes over them halfway up the climb, a quiet pressure behind the eyes, a flicker of movement at the edge of vision when no one walks beside them. Sometimes it is a shadow that seems to match their steps, other times it is the sound of soft breathing just beyond the reach of sight. It is easy to imagine the children still there, just beyond the snow line, seated among their gifts, the colors of their clothing muted by frost, watching without opening their eyes, waiting without moving their lips, the wind curling around them as it has for 500 years. The Inca saw the mountains as alive, and when you stand on those slopes you understand why the peaks rise like sentinels above the valleys, their flanks scored by centuries of ice, and rock their summits, touching the sky itself. They are not simply stone, they are something more, something that sees, something that remembers. And perhaps the gifts given to them are never truly taken, perhaps they remain there on some unseen plane, accepted, but not removed, their purpose still unfolding in ways no one living can understand. When the sun sets here, it does not fall quickly, it lingers, casting long blue shadows across the snow. The temperature drops like a stone, the stars emerge one by one, sharp and cold above the ridges, and in that moment when the wind stills and the air is thinner than silence, you might almost hear it, the faint low chant of voices that have not been heard in centuries, rising once more into the thin cold sky, as if the ceremony never truly ended. And somewhere among those voices are the quiet breaths of the children, still seated, still waiting, still carrying the hopes of a people into the endless white. The face is still, The eyes will never open again. And yet, something watches from behind the gold. The mask is thin. So thin that the shape of the cheeks and the curve of the lips still press against it from beneath. It has been hammered into the likeness of the dead, or perhaps into the likeness of how the living wanted them to appear in death. Smooth and gleaming under the torchlight. Unblinking. Silent. This is not the mask of a festival or a dance. This is a mask meant for the grave. Long before the first shovels of modern archaeologists bit into the earth. Long before the sound of cameras or the scent of cataloging ink. There were hands that shaped these masks in fire and shadow. In the palaces of ancient Mycenae, gold flowed like sunlight caught in metal. It was beaten flat with stones and shaped with wooden tools. And when a king died, or a warrior of great renown, the mask was placed over his face before the tomb was sealed. It was said to guard him from evil in the Shadowlands. Others whispered that it held his spirit close, binding it to the bones so it would never stray. In 1876, Heinrich Schliemann uncovered one such mask, a golden face with eyes closed and a mouth set in an unreadable line. He called it the Mask of Agamemnon, believing it belonged to the legendary king of Homer's tales. It was not Agamemnon. It was older, but the name remained. And even now, standing before it, one feels the weight of something ancient pressing in from behind the metal. Far across the ocean, on the mountainsides of pre-Columbian Mexico, another kind of mask was made. These were not flat sheets of hammered gold, but mosaics of turquoise, shell, and obsidian. The stones were placed so carefully that they caught the light like scales of a living thing. When a ruler of the Mixtec or the Maya passed into the next world, such a mask might cover his face, turning his features into something eternal, half human, half divine. In some burials, the eyes of the mask were left open. Behind them, the empty sockets stared out at eternity. There's something unsettling in that, as though the dead could still see from within, their gaze trapped behind a jewel-bright shell. In the cold earth of a Mycenaean tomb, the air is thick and still. The torches flicker and the gold gleams dully, the centuries having softened its brightness. One mask lies against the skull of its wearer, perfectly molded to his long-dead features. The archaeologists hesitate before touching it, as though removing it might break some invisible thread that binds the mask to the man. Some say these masks were guides, like a face the soul could wear on its journey. Others believe they were locks, keeping the spirit inside the tomb to protect the living from its wandering. Perhaps both are true. In the deserts of Peru, the Sycan culture created masks of a different kind. They shaped them from gold and copper with wide, staring eyes and a mouth set in a perfect oval. The expression is not human. It is calm, almost detached. When placed over the face of the dead, it transformed them into something otherworldly. The eyes were not meant to see as we do, but to look upon the world beyond. One mask was found still pressed against the skin of its owner. The cloth wrappings around it rotted to dust. The bones beneath were dry and fragile, yet the mask was untouched, as if the years had flowed around it like water around stone. Imagine standing in a burial chamber deep beneath the earth. Your torch casts only a small circle of light, and in that light a face gleams back at you. It is not alive, and yet it seems to be aware of you. The mouth is closed, but the line of the lips suggests they could part at any moment. The eyes are shut, but the lids are heavy, as though holding something back. The gold catches the warmth of your light and gives nothing in return. It feels less like metal and more like a presence. In many cultures, gold was more than wealth. It was the flesh of the gods, incorruptible, untarnished. To cover the face of the dead in gold was to give them the skin of divinity. But divinity is not always merciful. A god may guard you, or it may keep you. And so the masks endure, their expressions unchanged, their purpose only guessed at. Somewhere in the quiet of a museum, a golden face lies under glass. Visitors pass by, speaking softly, unaware that their reflections ripple faintly across its surface. The mask does not change. It does not need to. The room could be empty. The lights could be off. And still, in the dark, that face would remain, unmoving, waiting, remembering. The chamber is silent except for the slow drip of water somewhere far away, a steady rhythm that seems to count the passing of time in drops rather than years, and in the center of that silence the mask rests, where it has rested for centuries, the gold dimmed by dust, yet still alive, with a faint glow in the flicker of the torchlight, its edges molded to the curve of a face that has not drawn breath in an age. Those who have stood in such places speak of the strange feeling that comes over them, as though the air thickens between their skin and the walls, and the weight of the earth above presses, not only on the stone, but on the chest. The mask seems to draw the eye and hold it, as if it were not simply covering the features beneath, but guarding something unseen that stirs faintly behind the metal. In the tombs of ancient Mycenae, entire rows of the dead have been found, each one with a mask pressed against the hollow, where a face once was, each one different, in the curve of the lips, the shape of the nose, the tilt of the closed eyes. These were not anonymous faces, but personal ones shaped to remember, and yet the act of covering them changes them, turning them into something beyond the living. Far from Greece, in the deep jungles of Mesoamerica, other masks rest in the earth, mosaics of turquoise and obsidian pieced together so tightly that even after 1,000 years the seams are still sharp to the touch. They were placed upon rulers, priests, and warriors, their bright surfaces shining in the dim light of burial chambers, where incense smoke curled and chants rose to guide the dead into the next world. Some masks have small holes at the edge, as though they were once tied in place. Others are set into layers of wrappings, the body beneath reduced to dust and bone, while the mask remains whole and untouched, its eyes forever staring outward or upward, as if fixed on something distant beyond the reach of the living. In the high deserts of Peru, where the wind carves the sand into ripples like the surface of a dry sea, the Sycan buried their dead with masks of gold and copper, the eyes wide and watching, the mouths open in a perfect oval. The faces are not human, yet not entirely alien. They have a calmness that feels both protective and unyielding, like sentinels at a gate that never opens and never closes. The air in these burial places is often still, so still that you can hear your own heartbeat louder than the scrape of your boots against the floor. The torchlight wavers, and in that wavering the masks seem to move ever so slightly, a trick of light, perhaps, but the sensation remains that they are aware of you, that they have seen every visitor since the moment the earth was opened again. There are stories among those who work in museums that certain masks cannot be comfortably looked at for long. One curator claimed that while cataloging a set of Sycan burial masks, she found herself dreaming of them each night, waking with the vivid impression that she had been standing in a long dark corridor lined with faces all gleaming in faint gold and copper light, each one leaning ever so slightly toward her as she passed. In some beliefs the mask was more than a covering, it was a vessel through which the spirit could remain present, either to watch over descendants or to guard the place where the body lay. This meant the mask was not a symbol, but a dwelling, a thin wall between the realm of the living and whatever lay beyond. When such a vessel is made of gold, incorruptible and untarnished, it might last forever, and so too might the presence within. When you stand before one of these masks in the stillness of a sealed chamber, you might notice how the air seems heavier around it, the way the shadows gather a little more thickly at its edges, the way the space behind your shoulders feels somehow occupied, and though you tell yourself it is nothing, you keep glancing back, as if expecting to see someone standing there. In the ancient city of Mycenae, one mask was found pressed so tightly to the face beneath that the gold had taken on every contour, the line of the brow, the faint curve of the lips. When the mask was removed, the bones crumbled to dust, yet for a moment the face was there, suspended in gold, untouched by time. Then it was gone, leaving only the metal, like a memory that refuses to fade. What is most haunting is that many of these masks still seem to carry expression, some serene, some stern, some with the faintest trace of a smile, others with lips pressed as though to withhold words. The living may have shaped them to honor the dead, but now they seem to speak for themselves, without voice, without movement. Imagine walking deeper into such a tomb, the air cooler, with each step the darkness absolute, beyond the reach of your light, until in the far corner another mask catches a glint. It lies alone, the body it once covered long vanished, yet the mask remains bright and whole, as though it has been waiting, perhaps not for discovery, but for acknowledgement. The ancients may have believed these masks were keys, doors, seals, or faces for the soul to wear in eternity. Perhaps they were all these things. Perhaps they are still fulfilling that role even now, And perhaps when you look at them, it is not the living who are observing the dead, but the dead who are observing you. Somewhere beyond the walls of the tomb, wind moves through the trees, the world shifts, seasons turn, and centuries pass. Yet in the stillness, beneath the earth, the mask does not change, and whatever lies behind it, whatever presence lingers, remains untouched, as it has since the first moment gold met flesh, and the eyes behind it closed for the last time. And if you stand there long enough, listening to the drip of water and the faint hiss of your own breath, you may start to wonder whether the mask is guarding the one who lies behind it from the world outside, or whether it is guarding the world outside from the one who lies behind it. The jungle is never truly silent. Even in the dead of night, the air hums with the low chorus of unseen creatures. The wind slides through the leaves like a whisper just beyond understanding. And beneath it all is the slow, constant beat of water dripping into hidden pools deep in the earth. Somewhere in that darkness, the stone still waits. Massive shapes rise from the soil, their edges softened by centuries of rain. Faces as tall as two men stare with heavy-lidded eyes carved from single blocks of basalt. The features are broad, the expressions unreadable. They are the colossal heads of the Olmecs, and they have watched this land for nearly 3,000 years. No one living knows the names of the people whose faces they bear. No written history remains, no scroll or codex tells their story. Only stone and soil and the fragments of what was once a civilization that thrived long before the Maya, before the Aztec. Yet the earth still holds their secrets, and some of those secrets are stained a deep and unsettling red. The first hints came from an excavation on the southern coast of the Gulf of Mexico. Archaeologists uncovered a broad platform of stone, surrounded by low walls. The surface was worn smooth by time. At its center stood a carved altar, its sides decorated with the curling shapes of serpents and the crouched forms of jaguar men. Their eyes seemed to follow those who walked near. At first, the dark patches on the stone were thought to be mineral stains, the marks of water and age. But under careful study, they revealed something else. Iron particles too concentrated to be from the stone itself, traces of protein that did not belong to plants. The altar had been washed again and again by blood. In the Olmec world, the jaguar was not just an animal. It was the embodiment of power and danger. In their art, jaguar men crouch with human limbs and feline faces. Some wear headdresses heavy with feathers. Others hold blades of obsidian, sharp enough to cut flesh with ease. Scholars believe these figures were not myth alone, but masks for the living, warriors or priests who took on the spirit of the jaguar during ritual. The altars were not merely for offerings of maize or fruit. They were stages for something more visceral, something that bound the living to their gods through the spilling of life itself. On certain nights, the jungle would have felt different. The air heavy with the scent of wood smoke and copal resin. Torches lining the plaza, casting a wavering glow across the crowd gathered in silence. The colossal heads would stand like sentinels, their massive faces lit in gold and shadow. In the center, the altar waits, cool under the night sky. From the darkness beyond the crowd, the priests appear, their bodies painted in red and black, their faces hidden behind masks of jaguar snarls or serpent scales. In their hands they carry blades of volcanic glass, so dark they seem to swallow the torchlight. Behind them come the chosen, men or women or perhaps children, their wrists bound, their eyes wide. No one speaks. The drums begin slowly, a deep thud, like the sound of a distant heartbeat. The priest raises a hand, and the chanting begins low and steady. It rises and falls like the wind in the canopy until the rhythm matches the pounding of the drums. And then the blade falls. The Olmecs left no written word to explain why. Perhaps it was to feed the gods so the rains would come and the maize would grow. Perhaps it was to seal a pact between the rulers and the divine. Or perhaps it was fear. Fear that without such offerings, something far worse would come down from the skies or rise from the deep places beneath the earth. Whatever the reason, the altars tell the truth in silence. Their surfaces still hold the faint traces of countless rituals. The grooves carved along their edges may have been channels for liquid, and in the soil around them archaeologists have found bones, human and animal, buried together as if both were equal in the eyes of the gods. In the quiet after the act, the body would be carried away. The crowd would remain still, their faces lit by the dying flames. The jungle beyond would close, and once more the hum of insects returning, as if nothing had happened. Only the stone would remember. The colossal heads staring into the night, their expression unchanged, but somehow heavier. The Olmecs are gone. Their cities swallowed by vines and soil. Their god sleeping in the carved lines of stone faces and crouched jaguar men. But the blood remains, a memory written in iron and shadow. The morning after the ritual, the jungle wakes in its own way. The mist clings low to the ground, and the leaves drip with the night's condensation. The birds call in short bursts before fading into silence, and the air carries the faint metallic scent that lingers near the altar, a scent the wind does not take away quickly. The plaza stands empty now, the torches burned down to blackened stubs, the ground beneath them pressed flat, where the crowd had gathered. The colossal heads keep their gaze forward, their heavy stone faces untouched by the passage of the night, yet something in the air feels heavier, as though the echoes of drums and chants still circle the stones. In the soil near the ceremonial platform, the excavators found layers of offerings buried deep, bowls of maize shaped to resemble the sun's shells carried from far distant coasts, and the bones of jaguars, arranged with care alongside human remains. There were no signs of careless burial, no scattering of pieces, each bone laid as though in the correct place, as though the body beneath the earth still needed to be whole. At the edge of the site, a low mound hid another altar beneath layers of roots and soil. When it was uncovered, the carvings showed two figures, one human, one animal, locked in an embrace, or perhaps a struggle, the lines of their bodies intertwined, so that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. The surface bore the same dark stains, the same traces of iron and protein, the same silent record of what had been done there. The Olmecs carved serpents to their bodies, winding along the sides of the altars, their heads raised in mid-strike. The serpent was not only a creature of the ground, but of the sky and the water, its form shifting between worlds. Some believe these carvings were warning, others believe they were guides for the spirit released upon the stone, leading it to the place where the gods waited. There's a strange weight that comes with touching these stones, the way the carvings press into the palm, as if the grooves still remember the tools that made them, as if the stone has held onto the heat of hands long turned to dust. The silence in such a place is never total. The jungle breathes and moves, but beneath it there is another stillness, deeper and more patient. On certain days when the clouds hang low and the wind carries the scent of rain, it is easy to imagine the plaza alive again, the torches flaring against the walls of green, the people gathering in the shadow of the colossal heads, their eyes fixed on the altar at the center, the priests moving in slow measured steps, their masks gleaming with paint and gold, their blades catching the firelight like shards of night. The Olmecs may have believed that blood was the purest form of offering, that within it was the force that bound the living to the divine, that spilling it in the presence of the gods renewed the bond between worlds. The crops would grow, the rains would come, the rivers would swell with life, and the empire would endure. But there is another way to see it. Perhaps the gods they served demanded more than reverence. Perhaps they hungered, and the blood was not an offering freely given, but a necessity, one that bound the people in a cycle they could not break. When the rains failed, when the earth cracked under the sun's weight, when sickness crept through the villages, it was to the altars that the people turned, and in the quiet moments before the act, the chosen would stand upon the stone, the mask of the jaguar before them, the serpent carved at their feet, and the crowd would hold its breath, as though the world itself had paused to watch. And when it was done, when the chants had ended, and the torches burned low, the body would be taken away, the altar washed, though the stains could never truly be removed. The crowd would disperse into the darkness, their faces unreadable, their footsteps silent. Centuries later the jungle took it all back. The plazas buried the carvings hidden beneath roots and soil, the colossal heads left standing like watchmen who had forgotten what they were guarding, and yet beneath the green the stones kept their memory, the iron of the blood bound into their pores, the shapes of the jaguar and the serpent still sharp under the moss. Standing there, now the air thick with heat, and the sound of insects, one might feel a prickle at the back of the neck, a sense that the eyes of the stone heads have shifted ever so slightly, that the space between the trees holds more than shadow. The ground feels soft beneath the feet, yet deep under that softness is the hard, cold surface of the altar waiting. And if you close your eyes for a moment, you might hear it, the low thud of drums carried faintly through the air the rustle of bodies, moving in unison the sharp intake of breath, before the act the sound of a blade cutting through silence, and then the slow, steady drip that follows. The Olmecs are gone, their voices lost, their names swallowed by time, but the altars remain, the carvings remain, the colossal heads remain, and perhaps the gods remain too, waiting for the day when the plaza fills again, and the blood flows, as it once did under the gaze of stone that does not blink. The first sound is not the voice. It is the wind. It moves across the sand like a living thing. It drags a dry hiss from the dunes and carries it toward the horizon, where heat shimmers above the earth. And then, beneath the wind, a note begins to rise. Low at first, barely more than a hum, but it swells, gathering weight and rhythm until it feels older than the voice that gives it shape. It is a song without words, only syllables that pulse like the beat of a heart. The elders say it is not a song you learn. It is a song you are given. Across the deserts of Arabia, the Horn of Africa, and the high plains beyond, there were those known as storm singers, men and women whose voices could call the rain or drive it away. Inscriptions carved into weathered stone tell of them, not as myths, but as people whose gift was both feared and sought. Some were honored, kept close to kings and chieftains. Others were driven out, their voices said to be too dangerous to keep near. One such inscription, found on the wall of an ancient well, tells of a singer who brought 3 days of rain to a dying valley. Another warns of a voice that silenced the clouds for an entire season, leaving the earth to crack and the wells to fail. In every story, the songs are the same, long, unbroken threads of sound, sung in the heat, the singer standing alone beneath the open sky. In the old way, a storm singer's ritual began in silence. They would walk alone to the edge of the desert or to the high point of a ridge, their feet leaving faint trails in the sand. They would carry only a staff, carved with markings that meant nothing to the uninitiated. And they would wait. The waiting could be hours, sometimes days. The wind might shift once or twice. The sun might lower and rise again, but still the singer would remain. When the moment came, they would lift their head and begin the chant, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to pull from the chest more than the throat. Those who heard it said the air itself would change. The heat would feel heavier, the light sharper, the horizon closer, as if the sound carried more than music, as if it carried weight. In parts of Sudan, there is a story told of a woman named Zalifa, who sang when the sky had been empty for months. The people had gathered beneath the thorn trees, their jars dry, their voices low. She walked past them without a word, out into the open, and stood there with her head tilted toward the sky. Her song began as little more than breath. It rose and fell in slow arcs, the notes stretching out until they seemed to hang in the air. The wind came first, pulling the dust into small spirals around her feet. Then the light changed, the horizon darkened, and the first drop of water struck the sand. By the time her voice fell silent, the rain was falling in sheets. Not all storms called were gentle. Some were fierce, as if the voice had pulled too hard at the strings of the sky. In Yemen's highlands, the ruins of an ancient temple still hold carvings of figures with mouths open in song, their hair and robes whipped sideways by unseen winds. Beside them, smaller carvings show the land flooded, animals driven upward into the hills. It is said the temple was abandoned after one such storm broke its roof and sent its people scattering. Even now, fragments of these songs survive, passed down through families, hidden in the lullabies sung to children, or in the chants muttered by shepherds under the noonday sun. They are never sung in full, not unless there is a reason. The old ones say it is dangerous to call the sky without cause. Some say it is dangerous even to listen. In the small village of Al-Qaraba, on the edge of the Rub al-Khali, there's a man who claims to know one such song in its entirety. He will not sing it for strangers. But once, when the drought was deep and the wells were low, he was heard in the night, a long, low voice carrying across the flats. The next morning, a wall of dark clouds rose from the west, and by evening, the air was thick with the smell of rain. Some dismissed the stories as coincidence, but for those who have stood in the open desert, hearing a voice rise against the wind, feeling the shift in the air before the clouds gather, it is not so easy to dismiss. The old inscriptions speak of the singers not as magicians, but as intermediaries, people who knew the language of the wind and the sky, who could speak it in tones that made the air answer. Perhaps it was not the singer commanding the rain, but the rain recognizing its own name in the sound. In the far reaches of the empty quarter, there are dunes that move like tides, swallowing what lies beneath. Travelers say that sometimes, when the wind is right, you can hear a faint song rising from the sand, low, rhythmic, impossible to place. It fades if you listen too hard, but for a moment, it feels as though the air is not moving at all, as though it is holding its breath, waiting. The desert waits with the patience of stone, its dunes shifting in slow tides, its air shimmering under the weight of the sun, and in that waiting there is always the memory of the song that once stirred its silence. The wind carries it, though no lips move the rhythm hidden in the rise and fall of the air, the faint hum that is almost too soft to notice until it settles deep in the chest. In the highlands of Ethiopia, the elders tell of a man who could summon rain, but not without a cost. His name is lost to time, but the story remains that he would stand barefoot in the grasslands, his arms open to the horizon, his voice threading through the wind in long, low arcs, the sound bending the stillness around him until the air grew cool and the clouds gathered heavy and black. Yet each time he sang in full, he would grow weaker, his steps slower, his eyes clouded, until one day he did not return from the ridge where he sang. The songs were never simple melodies. They were woven from the pulse of the body, the beat of the heart, the slow rise and fall of breath. They moved like waves, each note flowing into the next, without end. The old ones say that a true storm song could last for hours, with no break, the singer's voice never faltering, as though the air itself carried part of the burden. On the coast of Oman, an ancient stone stands half buried in the sand, its face carved with spirals and lines that twist around the image of a human figure, with their head tilted back and mouth open. Above the figure, a series of marks, thought to represent falling water. Yet the stone stands far from any river or spring. The scholars say it may be a record of a storm singer's work, a memorial to the voice that brought water where none had been before. In the markets of Hadramaut, traders whisper about a chant that can still be heard when the Kharif winds sweep in from a sea. The sound is faint, almost like a sigh carried through the alleyways. Yet those who know say it is the breath of the old song hidden in the storm itself, as though the winds remember the one who called them. There are places in the desert where the sand is darker, where it holds the scent of rain even in the hottest months, and in those places travelers say the air feels thick with memory, as if the song still lingers just beneath the surface. Some believe that these were the gathering points where singers once stood, and the ground itself still holds their voice. The ritual was as much about the land as the sound. The singer would face the direction from which the rains were expected, feet set in the earth, like roots, their hands sometimes raised, sometimes pressed to the ground in silence. Before the first note, the song might begin as a hum, low and steady, then swell into a chant that rolled across the flats, with each wordless syllable a shape meant to mirror the movement of wind across open space. In some traditions, the storm singer did not work alone. There were those who kept the rhythm, with drums carved from wood, and hide their beats slow and deep like the heart of the earth itself. Others would stand in a circle around the singer, adding their voices in harmony, until the sound was no longer one voice, but many a wall of tone that pressed outward into the sky. Legends tell of times when the rain came too quickly, when the song was too strong, when the clouds broke in torrents that tore the soil away and filled the valleys with roaring water. It is said that the singer's voice could not be stopped once begun, that to interrupt it was to invite worse disaster, and so the people would watch helpless as the storm raged, praying for the song to find its end. In a remote valley between Yemen and Oman, there is a hollow in the rock, known as the Echo's Mouth. If you stand there and speak, your voice comes back to you not once, but in a rolling chain, as though something deep within is answering. Locals say that on certain nights, when the moon is gone, the hollow sings on its own, a low trembling note that swells and fades without human breath. Some say it is the earth remembering the song that summoned rain in an age long past. Even now there are those who claim to have heard the answer of the sky to the old chants, shepherds who sing to themselves in the heat of the day, only to feel the wind shift and darken the horizon. Travelers who hum the old rhythms to break the monotony of the march and find dust rising in distant spirals before the scent of rain touches the air. No one can prove the connection, And yet in the places where these stories are told, the belief is not questioned. The song is part of the land, and the land listens. When the final note fades, there is no applause, only the slow return of the ordinary. Sounds the rustle of leaves, the scrape of sand along stone, the call of distant birds. The sky may answer, or it may remain silent. But for those who know the song, the act itself is enough, for it is not simply a request for water. It is a conversation with something vast and unseen. In the deepest part of the Rub al Khali, where the dunes tower like waves frozen in time, there are travelers who speak of hearing voices at dusk, long low tones that seem to move just ahead of them, always beyond sight. The sound vanishes when they stop to listen, but returns as soon as they walk again. One man claimed to follow the sound for 2 nights before it ended in a hollow where the sand was cool to the touch and the air tasted faintly of rain, though no cloud had crossed the sky. Perhaps the songs that summoned rain were never truly lost. Perhaps they are still carried in the breath of the wind, waiting for someone to stand alone beneath the open sky and give them voice again. And perhaps if that voice is true, the clouds will gather, the air will change, and the first drop will fall like a note returning to the earth from which it was born. The lake does not move like other waters. It does not lap gently against the shore or ripple softly in the wind. It holds itself still, a perfect circle of green framed by the ridges of the Colombian highlands. From above, it looks like an unblinking eye set deep into the earth. For centuries, people have stood on its banks and whispered the same thing. The lake takes what it wants. The Muisca people called it sacred. Long before the Spanish came, before the world heard the name El Dorado, the lake was a place of offerings. Not coins or trinkets, but gold, shaped into animals, warriors, and suns, each one lowered into the water with care before disappearing into the green depths. The ritual was not simple. It began with silence, the kind that makes you aware of your own breathing. The people gathered on the shore, their bodies painted in colors that caught the light. At the center of it all stood the new leader, his skin coated in a paste of gold dust until he shone like the morning sun. He was placed upon a raft along with piles of treasure. As the drums began, slow, steady, the raft was pushed into the center of the lake. There, beneath the watching eyes of his people, the leader cast handfuls of gold into the water and lowered the rest in baskets until it vanished beneath the surface. The gold was not for the people. It was for the gods who lived in the water. The Spanish heard the stories and came hungry for the treasure. They brought ropes, buckets, and diving bells. They drained parts of the lake, clawed at the mud, and pulled up ornaments blackened by time. But the deeper they went, the more the lake resisted. One chronicler wrote of divers who sank without a trace. Others returned pale and shaking, swearing the floor of the lake had shifted beneath them. One claimed something had wrapped around his legs in the dark and tried to pull him down. In the 20th century, modern divers tried again. They came with tanks, lights, and ropes. The water was calm when they entered, but in minutes the currents rose, swirling without wind, pulling toward the center. The silt at the bottom shifted like a living thing, blinding them in a cloud of green and gold flecks. A diver named Torres swore that in the murk, he saw shapes moving, not fish, not plants, but long, pale forms twisting just out of reach. He surfaced gasping, his mask gone, his legs cramping as though something had gripped him too tightly. Others were not so lucky. 2 men went down and never came back up. Their bodies were never found. The lake has no river feeding it, no stream flowing out. It is a closed mouth, taking and holding. Locals say it is bottomless, but the truth is stranger. The floor is layered with centuries of offerings and silt so deep that no one has touched the true bed of the lake in living memory. Sometimes, after heavy rain, the water turns unusually clear, and in those rare moments, gold can be seen glinting far below. But no one dares to reach for it. The Muisca believed the gods of the lake did not forgive greed. To take from the water was to invite a debt you could never repay. Even today, fishermen will not cast their nets too far from shore. They say the center is a place you cannot trust, a place where the water itself seems to breathe. On quiet mornings, when the mist hangs low over the surface, it is said you can hear the sound of something moving beneath, a slow, heavy motion, as though the lake is turning over in its sleep. In 1911, A British company tried to drain the lake again. They cut a channel into the side of the mountain, and for weeks the water lowered. Gold ornaments appeared in the mud, but before they could take more, a landslide filled the channel. The lake rose again, swallowing the half-exposed treasures and sealing them away. The workers said it was no accident. The mountain had closed the wound. Even standing on the shore, there is something in the air that presses in, a heaviness, as though the lake is aware of you. The trees around it grow close, their branches leaning out over the water as if listening. Birdsong falls quiet near the edge, and the surface reflects the sky too perfectly, without the shimmer of wind. Some say it is beautiful. Others say beauty is only the first mask a dangerous thing wears. The wind moves softly over the ridges, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant rain, and yet down by the shore the air is still heavy, unmoving, as if the lake holds it and placed the surface unbroken save for the faint ripple that comes from somewhere far out toward the center, where the green water deepens to a shade that swallows light. Those who have been beneath it speak of a silence that is not true silence, but a pressure, a low hum that settles against the bones. Once you descend past the reach of the sun, the light fades, quickly replaced by a thick green gloom, the surface above shrinking to a pale circle, and the water cooling in slow degrees, until it feels like the grasp of a hand that will not let go. One diver who returned from such a descent told of how the floor seemed to shift beneath him, as if the silt were alive. It rose and swirls at the slightest touch, clouding the world to nothing, and in that blind suspension, he felt the pull. It was not the pull of current or gravity, but something else, something that seemed to take hold of his chest and draw him downward. He kicked upward against it, feeling his limbs grow heavy and slow, until at last the green light above began to brighten, and the pressure loosened enough for him to break the surface, gasping. In the villages nearby, there are stories of those who did not come back. They are spoken of in low voices, their names rarely repeated. The elders say the lake does not give up what it has taken. They say it keeps not just the gold, but the breath and the shadow of the ones who reach for it. Long ago, before the machines, before the metal tanks and lights, the offerings were given willingly. The people came with their treasures, shaped by careful hands, jaguars and birds hammered from gold so thin the light passed through the edges. They came with woven baskets, filled with emeralds and shells, carried from the far coast. The air around the lake would be thick with the sound of drums and the low chant of the muisca, the water lit by the reflection of the sun on the skin of the gilded leader. As he stepped onto the raft, the treasures lowered into the depths with care. The belief was simple and unshakable. The gods below gave life to the land. They brought the rains to the fields. They kept the rivers alive and the earth fertile. And in return they asked for gifts, gifts that shone in the dark places where they dwelled, gifts that sank without a sound into the still green water. Now the gifts remain, but the hands that placed them are gone, and the gods are silent, if they were ever silent at all. There are times when the mist is low and the clouds hang heavy, when the lake does not reflect the sky at all. Instead it darkens, as though something has passed beneath the surface, a shadow, too wide to be a fish, too slow to be drift of silt. The water shifts slightly at the center, and then stills again, and those on the shore look away, as though they have seen nothing. Fishermen will not speak of it, but they steer their small boats in wide arcs, never crossing the heart of the water. Their nets are cast near the edge, and even then quickly drawn, and no matter how poor the catch, for to linger too long is to invite attention, and attention from the lake is never good. In 1965, a small team came to explore the depths with modern gear. They brought lights and cameras and ropes. Their plan was simple: to map the floor and mark the richest points for recovery. On the first day the lake was calm. The divers descended and brought back fragments of gold, thin sheets, blackened with age and twisted into shapes unrecognizable. They spoke of strange dips in the floor, sudden drops where the silt fell away into darkness, and of cold spots where the temperature plunged without warning, as though a door had opened into a deeper place. On the third day one of them did not return. The other surfaced pale and silent, unwilling to speak of what had happened. The search lasted until night, but the body was never found. The lake closed over their efforts without a ripple. Locals were not surprised. They said the lake had taken its price. It always does. Some believe that under the layers of silt and treasure there is an opening, a fissure in the earth that leads into caverns where the water moves in slow tides unseen. Others believe the bottom is not stone at all, but a soft, endless descent, a place where weight and time and light lose meaning, and nothing that enters will rise again. The air on the banks is often cool. Even on hot days, the trees lean toward the water, their roots twisting deep into the damp soil. It feels as though the forest and the lake share some quiet agreement. The leaves shift with the slightest breeze, yet the water remains still, its surface an unbroken mirror. At dusk the color changes, the green deepens to black, the ridges fade into shadow, and the first stars appear above, but the lake does not reflect them clearly. Instead they seem to shimmer, as though seen through a thin veil of smoke. Sometimes one will vanish entirely, as though swallowed by the water. The people who live nearby say it is then that the lake is most awake. They say you should not stand too close. They say you might feel the same pull that the divers speak of, not a tug on your body, but a call somewhere deeper, something that urges you to step forward, to let the water take you as it has taken so many before. No one knows how much gold lies beneath or how many bodies rest there. The numbers are guesses. The truth is locked away under centuries of silt and shadow. Perhaps the gods still sit in the darkness, holding the offerings in hands that have never seen the sun. Perhaps they wait for the next gift to break the surface and sink into their world. Perhaps they are not waiting at all. And when the night is silent and the moon lies over the water like a silver coin, you might almost think you see it tilt and slip downward into the depths, leaving the surface smooth and empty once more, as if nothing had been there at all. The night is alive with heat. It rises in waves from the long bed of glowing embers, painting the air in a shifting shimmer. The scent of charred wood drifts on the breeze, carrying with it the salt of the nearby ocean and the faint sweetness of flowers crushed beneath bare feet. A crowd gathers in the darkness beyond the fire's reach. Faces lit by the red glow lean forward in anticipation. Somewhere in the shadows, drums begin, slow, steady, their rhythm echoing the pulse of the earth. This is not a performance for outsiders. It is a promise kept between the living and the dead. On a remote island far from the trade winds of the larger Pacific, the firewalkers prepare. They have done this for generations. The embers come from wood chosen carefully, felled in a ritual manner, and burned down over hours until nothing remains but the deep red heart of the fire. No one touches the pit except the elders, not because of fear, but because it is not yet ready. When the time comes, the village gathers in a wide circle around the glowing path. The dancers emerge first, their bodies painted with symbols passed down in memory alone. Spirals for the ocean's pull, triangles for the teeth of the reef, long lines for the horizon that never ends. They move in arcs around the pit, their feet stamping in time with the drums, their voices rising in a chant older than any written word. The song is not for the people watching. It is for those who came before. The firewalkers appear only when the chant has reached its height. Men and women alike, their heads adorned with leaves and shells, their eyes fixed not on the fire, but on the darkness beyond it. Their steps are slow, deliberate. They stop at the edge of the pit, the embers glowing brighter under the shifting wind. The chant changes, sharper now, insistent, a call rather than a song. One by one, they step onto the coals. There is no hesitation, no flinch. The embers shift under their weight, small sparks leaping up around their ankles. But their faces remain calm, their pace unbroken as they walk the length of the pit. The light dances over their skin, and for a moment they seem almost weightless, as if the fire has no claim on them. When the last firewalker steps off the embers, the drums stop all at once. The silence is sudden, heavy. The air smells of heat and ash, and the villagers bow their heads, not to the fire, but to the unseen guests who have walked with them. They say the fire does not burn because the walkers are not alone. The ancestors walk beside them, their spirits a shield against the heat. The chant is an invitation, a bridge between the living and the dead. Without it, the fire would take what is owed. In the late 19th century, a group of missionaries witnessed such a ritual and described it in their journals. They wrote of men and women walking across embers hot enough to scorch the air, yet showing no sign of pain or injury. They also wrote, perhaps without realizing it, of the way the wind shifted when the chant began, a wind that seemed to press down rather than move across the island, and of the strange hush that fell over the crowd when the last walker stepped off the fire. Not all who try succeed. It is said that to step into the fire without the blessing is to invite ruin. On one neighboring island, a young man attempted to walk without the chant, claiming he needed no spirit to protect him. He made it only halfway before collapsing. His feet blistered and blackened. The elders said he had walked alone, and the fire had claimed him. When scientists arrived in the 20th century to study the ritual, they brought thermometers, cameras, and theories. They measured the heat of the coals, over 500 degrees Celsius, and attempted to walk themselves without chant or dance. They did not make it far. The burns were immediate, deep, and painful. What the instruments could not record was the shift in the air when the ritual was performed in its true form. The rhythm of the drums, the vibration of the chants, the way the walkers moved as if their steps were not on earth at all, but on something else entirely. There is no single name for the firewalkers. Each island calls them something different, but the meaning is always the same: those who carry the flame without being touched by it. And when the embers fade and the night grows quiet, it is said the firewalkers leave not just with unburned feet, but with something unseen, a piece of the fire spirit, to keep until the next time the ancestors are called to walk again. The embers glow long into the night, their light reflecting in the eyes of those who remain gathered around the pit. The air, still humming faintly, with the echo of the chant though no voice, now speaks at the smell of char, and salt clings to the skin, and the wind carries it down toward the shore, where the waves rise and fall in their own slow rhythm, as if answering the beat of the drums that have only just faded. The firewalkers sit apart, their feet bare, their faces calm, their breathing slow. They do not speak at once, for the crossing is not the end of the ritual, it is the descent to the place where the living and the dead share a single path, and when they return from it, they must walk gently back into the world of the living. The elders bring water, not to drink, but to pour over the coals, and thin streams the hiss, rising like a whisper into the dark and curling upward before vanishing into the night. There are stories told here of times when the ritual was broken, when the chant was interrupted by a voice not meant to be heard, when the steps faltered on the coals, and the fire rose up to claim the one who walked without the full shield of the ancestors. On one such night the wind shifted. Suddenly the flames brightened, and a man stumbled, his foot pressing too long on the heart of the ember bed. He did not cry out, but when he stepped off the fire, the skin of his foot was already blackened, and the smell of it drifted over the silent crowd. The elders said the connection had been broken for a moment, and in that breath of time the fire had taken its due. On another island far across the Pacific, the fire bed was longer, stretching almost the length of a fishing canoe, and the walk required more than steady steps, it required faith, carried over a longer silence. The villagers there believed that the coals were not merely heat, but a living river of the spirit world, and to cross it was to pass through a place where the living body was for, and some who tried without the proper rites did not fall or burn, but emerged on the other side, pale and quiet there, eyes distant as if something had followed them back from the embers. When outsiders came to study, they saw only the physical. They spoke of moisture in the skin of the feet, or the insulating crust of ash above the hottest coals, but these same men found their explanations useless when they tried to walk themselves, for the ash broke beneath their steps, and the heat rose sharp and merciless, blistering their soles. Before they could take more than a few strides, they returned to the shore to cool their burns in the sea, their instruments recording numbers, but not the quiet in the air, not the way the fire seemed to breathe in time with the song. The elders never sought to correct the outsiders, they only smiled and said that to understand the walk, one must first understand the call, for the fire does not open its path to those who do not speak its language. In some villages the rite is linked to the changing of the seasons, the first planting of the taro, or the end of a long voyage at sea. The fire is built not only for the walk, but for the sharing of food, for the telling of the old stories, for the remembrance of those whose names are no longer spoken outside the chant. The walking is part of a greater circle, one that ties the living to the dead, the sea to the shore, the flame to the rain. There is a belief among certain islands that each ember holds a spirit, a fragment of an ancestor's fire, and that when the walkers step upon them, those spirits rise for the length of a breath, to walk beside them unseen, yet present their weight light upon the shoulders, their voices hidden within the chant. Some claim to have felt it, a coolness in the air around the face, while the heat licks at the feet, a strange balance of elements in a place where the two should never meet. It is said that in the oldest times the walk was not across wood embers, but across stones heated for days, in great pits the stones, taken from places where the ocean met the mountain cliffs, and carried inland by hand, each one chosen for the sound it made when struck together, for in that sound the elders claimed they could hear the faint memory of the fire to come. These stones, once heated, would glow faintly in the night, and hold their heat for hours, and the walkers would move over them in slow, steady steps until the path was crossed, the chant rising in steady waves around them. There are places where the fire bed is prepared not in open ground, but under the canopy of trees, the light caught and bent by the leaves above, so that the air within glows red and green together. In such a place the sense of the world beyond fades, and the walker might feel as though the embers stretch on without end, a path of fire through the heart of the forest itself. The fire does not speak, yet those who walk say they hear it. They hear the shift and sigh of the coals, the faint crackle of wood not yet burned through the hiss, when a step sends a spark spinning into the air, and they say beneath that there is another sound, a low hum that keeps time with the beating of their heart, and fades the moment they leave the pit. When the ritual ends, the coals are left to cool untouched. The ashes will be gathered later and taken to the sea, scattered on the tide, so that the fire returns to the water from which it was born, for the islands are circles within circles, and nothing here is left to waste. Those who watch from the shadows feel the same stillness each time the walk is complete, a weight in the air, as if something unseen has passed by just beyond the edge of the firelight, a presence that lingers for a moment before slipping away into the night, perhaps back across the ocean, perhaps into the trees, perhaps nowhere at all. And always as the embers fade, there is the same thought left unspoken, the same question hanging in the night. What would happen if one day the ancestors did not answer the call, and the fire was left to decide on its own who may pass and who may burn? The wind on the Altiplano is never still. It moves like a constant breath across the endless plains, carrying with it the cold scent of stone and the thinness of air that comes from standing at nearly 13,000 feet above the sea. The sky here is vast, almost too large, the kind of sky that makes the land below seem smaller, more fragile. And in the middle of that open world, there stands a stone. It is older than memory, older than the names that have been given to it. A single slab of andesite, carved with strange figures that stare without eyes, their shapes caught forever in a language no one can read. It is called the Gateway of the Sun. The stone rises alone in the ancient ruins of Tiwanaku, far from the nearest mountain pass, its surface worn but unbroken. The arch it forms is not wide, barely enough for a person to walk through, and yet it feels as if it was made for something much larger. Its lintel is covered in carvings that seem to shimmer when the light strikes them at certain hours. A figure stands at the center, a being with a radiant crown, holding staffs in each hand, flanked by winged attendants whose faces are half human, half bird. No one alive knows what they mean. Some say they are gods. Others say they are not gods at all. The archaeologists say it once stood as part of a larger wall. That time, and the shifting earth, left it alone in the open. The locals say it was never part of a wall. It was always a doorway, but not one that leads to any place a map can show. They call it Intipunku, the door of the sun, and they warn that it does not open for everyone. The legend is always told the same way. There are times when the light falls just right, a thin line of gold slipping between the stones at dawn or dusk, and the air in the arch changes. It becomes thicker, heavier, as if you've stepped into water. If you pass through then, you do not come out the other side. At least, not here. Some call it the place of no return. Others say it is a crossing, a step into another world, older than this one, where the gods still walk, and the sun never sets. The wind shapes the grass and waves around the stone, carrying the sound of distant footsteps that never seem to arrive. Travelers who camp near the ruins speak of waking to find the arch glowing faintly in the dark, a pale silver light pooling beneath it. Sometimes they hear voices in a language they do not know. Sometimes the voices are calling their name. In the 1970s, a traveler named Emilio Vargas disappeared while visiting Tiwanaku. His friends said they were walking together, exploring the site, when Emilio stopped at the arch and stared upward. They turned to look at another ruin, and when they turned back, he was gone. The ground around the stone was undisturbed, the plain was empty, and there was no sign of him ever leaving. The search went on for days. It found nothing, Others have vanished too, not many, but enough that the stories are remembered. The locals say it is never random. The stone chooses. They speak of a rhythm in the earth beneath the arch, a slow pulse you can feel if you press your hand to it. Some have tried and felt nothing. Others have pulled their hand away as if burned. At noon, the sun stands high above the plains, and the arch casts a perfect shadow on the ground. It stretches like a road of darkness, pointing toward the far horizon. Some believe this is its true direction, not the empty plains in front of it, but the place the shadow points toward, a place that is not of this world. When the wind stills here, and it does sometimes, for just a breath, the silence is complete. In that silence, the stone seems to lean toward you. The carvings seem sharper, the faces more alive, the lines in the crown of the central figure flickering like rays of real light. And in that moment, it is easy to believe the stories. Easy to believe that if you stepped forward, the air inside the arch would not be the same air you breathe now. That the first step would be on this earth, and the second would be somewhere else entirely. The sky above the Altiplano fades from deep blue to gold, and the wind softens until the tall grasses no longer sway the air as thin, but carries the scent of stone warm through the day. And as the sun dips lower, the shadows of the ruins stretch long across the plain reaching toward the mountains that watch in the distance. The gateway of the sun stands alone, yet not alone, for the space around it feels occupied. The silence that gathers here at dusk is not empty but full, as though something unseen waits just beyond the edge of hearing. The locals know this hour. They do not approach the arch when the last light slides across its face and sets the carved figure aglow. They say it is the moment when the door is closest to opening. Some claim to have seen the air within the arch begin to ripple like heat above the sand, though the wind is cold. Others say the ground beneath their feet seemed to hum a low, steady vibration that rose into their legs and stayed there long after they stepped back. There is an old tale of a shepherd who crossed through at such an hour. He was searching for a lost alpaca, and did not heed the warnings. He passed beneath the stone, and vanished from sight. The herd was found the next day grazing on the far slope, but the shepherd was never seen again. His footprints ended at the center of the arch, the earth beyond smooth and untouched, as if no step had ever fallen there. In the 1990s, a group of travelers camped near Tiwanaku to watch the sunrise over the ruins. One of them awoke in the night to find the arch faintly illuminated from within, a pale light that seemed to breathe brighter then dimmer. In slow rhythm, he roused two companions, and together they walked closer. The air grew cold as they approached, and the sound of their own steps seemed to fade, until the only sound was a faint whisper in a language none of them knew. They did not cross through. They turned away and returned to their camp, but by morning one of them was gone. The other swore he had been there when they lay down to sleep. Archaeologists have studied the gateway. For decades they measure its angles, map its carvings, and trace its alignment with the sun at solstice. Yet the purpose remains unknown. The central figure, with its radiant headdress, is flanked by rows of smaller beings, some holding staffs, others with wings or strange masks. Their eyes are deep cuts in the stone that seem to follow the light, and the longer you look, the more it feels as though they are watching you, not as carved symbols, but as living witnesses to whatever passes beneath. Some believe the arch marks a calendar, its carvings a record of celestial cycles, but the legends say otherwise. They speak of the door as a crossing point, a place where the world of men and the world of the gods brush so closely that one can step from one into the other. They say the crossing can bring you to a place of endless light, or to a place where the sun never rises, a place of no return. There is a story told quietly among the elders about a man who came from far away to see the arch. He arrived with instruments and charts, but no offerings. He laughed at the idea of danger, and spent hours walking through the doorway from one side to the other. Nothing happened until the third day, when the dawn light struck the arch, and the carvings lit in gold. He stepped through once more, and in the time it took to cross the space between the two stones, he was gone. The air inside the arch shimmered like water for a heartbeat, and then was still. His belongings remained, his notes scattered on the ground, his tent untouched, but the man was gone. At times the air here feels ordinary, the wind passing freely, the sun warming the stone. At other times the space within the arch feels thick, as though it resists your hand when you reach into it, and in those moments the light on the carvings seems sharper. The faces of the winged attendants more defined, their expressions no longer fixed, but shifting in ways you cannot quite see if you blink. Some visitors leave offerings, still coins, or small carved figures, placed at the base of the arch. Sometimes these offerings are gone by morning, though no one has touched them. Sometimes they remain, but are found split cleanly in two, as though by a blade, though the cuts are smooth and cold to the touch. When night falls fully, and the stars burn in the high thin air, the gateway of the sun stands as a darker shadow against the sky. The wind hums around its edges, and the grass moves like waves on a still sea. Those who have camped here speak of waking to find the arch framed by a faint ring of light, like a halo suspended in the air. Inside there is only darkness, yet it feels deep, as if it opens onto a vast space beyond the plain. The legends say that if you hear your name whispered from the arch, you must never answer, and you must never step forward, for the one calling is not of this world, and to follow that voice is to walk into a place from which no path leads back. The morning sun will rise the same as it has for thousands of years. The light will strike the carvings and cast a long shadow onto the plain. But for those who know the stories, that shadow is more than absence of light. It is a path, and the question is not where it leads, but whether it waits for you. And so the gateway of the sun stands unmoving, yet never still, the stone holding within it a silence that is not empty, a promise that is not spoken, and perhaps a door that even now waits for the next step, the next name, the next moment, when the light falls just right, and the air within turns heavy with the weight of another world. It begins in darkness, not the darkness of sleep, but the kind that makes you aware of your own breathing, the kind where even the smallest sound feels too loud. Somewhere beyond the hills, the Aegean lies quiet under the moon. But here, inland, the night belongs to the grove. The air is heavy with the scent of crushed herbs and damp earth. The wind does not move. The trees stand close together, their branches interlaced like fingers, shutting out the stars. A narrow path winds between them, lit only by the glow of torches. The flames are muffled by thick cloths, their light dimmed to a dull gold. Along the path, figures move in silence. Their faces are hidden by hoods, their robes unmarked. They carry nothing but the small clay cups bound to their belts and the weight of what they are about to witness. This is the night of the mysteries. The city outside knows nothing of what will happen here. Even the emperor in Rome cannot command these secrets from the mouths of the initiates. To speak of them is to invite death. Not metaphorical, not symbolic, death by decree. The grove is the domain of Demeter and Persephone, the goddess who gave grain to mankind and the daughter who vanished into the underworld. The feast that will take place tonight is not for the body. It is for the soul. The path narrows, and the air changes. A faint warmth drifts toward the initiates, carrying with it the smell of smoke and something sweet, like roasting barley. The torches ahead burn brighter, their flames no longer muffled. In the clearing beyond, the firelight touches the trunks of olive trees, painting them in shifting orange and black. In the center stands a long, low table. It is made of stone, its surface worn smooth. Around it, the elders wait, their faces bare, their eyes reflecting the flames. No one speaks. From the shadows, attendants step forward, carrying clay jars sealed with wax. The jars are set at the far end of the table. The wax is broken. The liquid inside is poured into bowls carved from wood and horn. It is pale, almost milky, and its scent is strong, not of wine, not of any drink sold in the market, but of something older, something mixed according to a measure that only the keepers know. One by one, the initiates are handed their bowls. No toast is given. No prayer is spoken aloud. Only the eyes of the elders watching as each initiate lifts the drink to their lips. The taste is strange, bitter and earthy, with a heat that spreads quickly down the throat. It is not unpleasant, but it is not meant to be enjoyed. It is meant to do something. The firelight wavers. The shadows on the olive trunks begin to shift in ways that do not match the flicker of the flames. The air feels thicker, heavier, as if the grove itself has moved closer. The elders lead the initiates to the table, but no food waits there. Only the bowls, and in the center, a single loaf of bread, untouched. The chanting begins. It is low, almost a murmur, each voice blending into the next until the sound seems to come from the ground rather than from human mouths. The rhythm is slow at first, then builds, the syllables repeating like the beat of a drum. The flames bend toward the table. The air grows warmer, though no wind stirs. The initiates close their eyes. The chant is inside them now, pulsing in time with their hearts. The taste of the drink lingers on their tongues, sharper now, tinged with something metallic. When the chanting stops, the silence is sudden and vast. The fire seems brighter, the shadows deeper. The elders step back from the table. And then, without warning, the grove is no longer the grove. The trees are taller, their branches heavy with fruit that glows faintly in the dark. The air is warmer still, scented with flowers that bloom only in dreams. The ground beneath the initiates' feet is not earth, but something smoother, colder, though they do not remember stepping onto it. Figures stand at the far edge of the clearing. They are tall, robed, their faces hidden in shadow. In their hands, they carry dishes of gold and silver, piled high with food that shines as if lit from within. The elders do not speak. The initiates do not breathe. The figures approach in silence. They place the dishes upon the stone table. The bread at its center is gone. No one saw it taken, yet it is gone. One figure remains at the head of the table. Slowly, they lift their hood. The light catches their face, but it is not a face that belongs to the mortal world. The face before them seems both young and old, the eyes deep and bright, as if they hold the reflection of fires long extinguished and yet still burning, the skin pale, with a glow that is not of moonlight, the lips curved in neither smile nor frown, but in a shape that speaks of knowing. The figure does not speak, yet the silence between them fills with meaning, the kind that does not pass through words, but settles directly into the mind. The other robed shapes move without sound around the table, their hands arranging the shining dishes, each plate holding fruit that gleams as if carved from amber, bread dark as the earth after rain, and vessels of liquid that shimmer like molten gold, though the air around them carries no scent of wine or grain. The elders step back, leaving the initiates standing before the table, the flicker of the fire no longer the only light, for a faint radiance now seeps from the food itself, touching the faces of all who stand there. An unspoken gesture bids them to sit, though the stone benches were cold before, they now feel warm, as though a living pulse runs through them. The figure at the head of the table raises a cup, the movement slow and deliberate, the liquid inside catching the light in a way that makes it seem both solid and fluid. The initiates follow, lifting their own cups, though none remembers being given one. The drink is cool on the tongue, with a taste that changes in each heartbeat, bitter then sweet, then something that cannot be named, a taste that feels like memory. The world beyond the table begins to fade, the trees dissolve into shadow, the fire becomes a distant glow, and all that remains clear is the table, the food, and the faces around it, some of which no longer belong to those who entered the grove with them. There are strangers here, robed and hooded, yet their hands are bare, their skin marked with lines and symbols that seem to move as they watch the initiates eat. Each bite is a flood of sensation, not hunger sated, but a sense of something unlocked. The air grows heavier, not with heat, but with weight, as though the space they inhabit has deepened, layers folding over layers, until the ground is far below. The figures seated beside them are no longer solid. They seem to ripple like the surface of a pond touched by a single drop, and from somewhere beyond the circle of light comes a sound like the slow turning of vast stone wheels. One of the elders rises and walks to the head of the table, bowing their head low before the figure, whose eyes never leave the initiates. The elder places both hands upon the stone, and for an instant the surface is not stone at all, but something darker, shifting beneath their touch. Before the illusion fades, the figure at the head of the table lifts their gaze toward the arch of the sky, though no stars are visible here, and as their lips part, a sound emerges. Not speech, not song, but a tone that vibrates in the bones of all who hear it. The initiates feel it travel through them like a current, every heartbeat now matching its rhythm, their breath falling into step with it, their sight bending until the edges of the table seem impossibly far away, and yet close enough to touch. The food before them now glows more brightly, its light spilling onto the ground until the very air seems liquid. The tone rises a fraction, and the light responds, stretching upward as if pulled by invisible hands. One by one the hooded strangers stand, and step back into the dark, their shapes melting into the shadow, until only the initiates, the elders, and the central figure remain. The tone softens, and the light dims, until the grove slowly returns, the olive trees, their trunks black, against the embers, the scent of smoke returning, as if it had never left. The food on the table is gone, the cups empty, the bread nowhere to be seen. The elders say nothing. They gather the initiates and lead them back along the narrow path, the torches burning low, the air cooling around them, though no one feels the cold. Each step seems longer than it should, and yet the ground feels as though it is drawing them forward, the grove receding into silence behind them, until the sound of the drums from the outer edge of the sacred ground reaches their ears. In the city beyond, life continues. The market stalls open, the sea breeze carries the smell of fish and salt, but those who have walked the path to the midnight feast will never see it in the same way. Their eyes hold a reflection of something they cannot speak, of something that will never pass their lips under threat, not of law alone, but of something older, something that watches still from the dark spaces between the olive trunks. They say that the vision fades in time, that the taste of the drink lingers for days and then is gone, but the initiates know this is not true. For in dreams the table returns, the faces return, the soundless voice of the figure at the head of the feast calls to them in tones that resonate through the marrow of their bones, and in the quietest hours before dawn they wake with the sensation of warmth under their feet, as though the stone benches and the pulse that ran through them have followed them back into the waking world. The threat of death for speaking is not merely to protect the ritual, it is to protect the one who is seen from being taken back too soon. For some say that once you have sat at that table you are marked, and the mark is not erased in life or in death. And so the midnight feast remains as it has for centuries, hidden from the eyes of those who would break its circle, unseen by those who have not been called, and untouched by the passing of empires. A table set in the heart of the night, waiting for the next time. The path through the grove is lit by torchlight, and the air is thick with the scent of crushed herbs, and something far older that stirs when the first cup is lifted. The hill is quiet, but not silent. There is the sound of wind moving across the grass, the distant cry of a bird, the faint hiss of heather brushing against stone. And yet, beneath it all, there is something else. A stillness that feels aware. At the center of the hill stands a stone, tall, weathered, its surface rough with centuries of wind and rain. It leans ever so slightly toward the east, as if listening to something far away. Moss clings to its base, and lichen blooms in pale circles along its face. It is older than the kingdom that surrounds it, older than the language spoken by those who come to touch it, older, perhaps, than the memory of men. They say the stone can speak, and more than that, it can choose. The legend is simple, and yet it has crowned kings. In the ancient days of Ireland and Scotland, the stone was the final judge of a ruler's worth. The candidates would place their hands upon its cold surface, or stand with one foot pressed against it. If the stone accepted them, it would give its answer. It would roar. The sound was said to rise from deep within, like the rumble of earth before a storm. It was not the wind, not the shifting of the ground. It was the voice of the stone itself, and in that sound was the will of the land. One such stone still stands at the hill of Tara in Ireland, the Liafail, the stone of destiny. It was here, the stories say, that the high kings were chosen, a place where earth and sky met, and the land itself decided who would rule it. According to the old tales, the roar of the stone could be heard for miles when the true king touched it. Some said it was the voice of ancient gods. Others believed it was the spirit of the land. But all agreed, when the stone spoke, its choice was final. It is not the only one. Across the sea, on the island of Iona, the stone of Scone once sat in the abbey, the sacred seat of Scottish coronations. It too was believed to hold power, though its voice was said to be softer, more like a deep vibration felt through the bones rather than heard in the air. Rulers came from far and wide to stand upon it, hoping for the silent approval that would seal their fate. These stones were not carved for beauty. They were not monuments to be admired. They were tools of power, bound to the earth, and those who dared approach them came with both reverence and fear. There are stories of those who failed the stone's test, men who placed their hands upon it and felt nothing but the chill of the wind. No sound, no stir, no sign. Some of them accepted the silence and walked away. Others did not. The legends say the land itself rejected them, their reigns short and troubled, ending in blood or betrayal. Even now, centuries after the crowning rites have ended, people still visit these stones. Some come out of curiosity, some out of faith. A few, only a few, claim to have felt something. A faint warmth under the hand on a cold day. A subtle hum beneath the surface, as if the stone's heart still beats somewhere deep below. One old farmer told of laying his palm against the stone at Tara and feeling it press back, not with movement, but with a weight that settled into his chest. The scholars call it superstition. They say the roar was the work of hidden pipes, or of men placed out of sight, to give the signal. They say the hum is nothing more than the vibration of wind through the stone. But those who have stood before it in the stillness of dawn are not so sure, because there are times, rare but remembered, when the stone has spoken without a king to crown. A shepherd on Iona, hearing the low thrum under his boots while moving his flock. A traveler at Tara, startled by the deep echo that rose through the ground at sunset. No cause was found, no explanation given. The wind sweeps the hill, tugging at the grass, but the stone remains unmoved. Its shadow stretches long across the ground, pointing toward the horizon. It has stood through storms, through wars, through the rise and fall of kings. And still it waits. And if the legends are true, it listens. The night settles over the hill in a way that feels heavier than the day the wind softens, and the grasses no longer sway, so freely the air cools, but not in the way that brings comfort. It cools in a way that sharpens the senses, making every sound carry further, every shadow stretch longer. The stone stands, as it always is, tall and silent, yet the silence now feels as if it is waiting for something. The old stories speak of the stones awakening when the land is in need, that they do not choose a ruler simply to crown, but to guard and guide in times when the world leans toward darkness. And there are those in the nearby villages who swear that such a time may be coming soon. They speak of small things, at first birds avoiding the hill for days at a time, the grass around the base of the stone growing taller and darker than the rest, and of a faint sound like a sigh, heard just after sunset when no one else is near. One evening a young woman from the village climbed the hill out of curiosity. She had heard the tales since childhood, but had never placed her own hand upon the stone. She reached it at twilight, when the sky burned gold, and read over the horizon the light, catching the rough surface in a way that seemed to draw her closer. She pressed her palm against the cold rock, and for a moment felt nothing. Then a deep vibration moved through her hand into her arm and down into her chest. It was not strong, but it was steady, like the slow beating of a great heart. She pulled her hand back in shock, yet the sensation lingered long after she walked away. Stories like hers are told quietly, often at the back tables of the local inn or over the low crackle of a fire, and they are not told for entertainment. They are told with the weight of warning, for it is said that when the stone stirs without a king to name, it means the land is unsettled, and the choosing may soon be forced. In Scotland the tale of the Stone of Scone is whispered in much the same way, though the stone now rests in Edinburgh Castle, returned from Westminster Abbey, where it lay for centuries. During its time in England it was part of every coronation, and though the rites were stripped of their older magic, some say the stone still knew the truth, and still listened. There is a record from the early 20th century of a guard who swore he heard a low hum while standing alone near it at night. He thought it was the sound of distant engines, until he felt it in his boots, and realized the floor beneath him was trembling ever so slightly. The idea that these stones are alive in some way is not new in the oldest myths. They were gifts from the gods, or fragments of the world's foundation placed in the open, so the earth could speak to the people through them. In such stories the roar was not simply approval, it was the sound of the land recognizing itself in the one chosen to rule, and the hum was its way of reminding the unchosen that the stone was still watching, still listening. There is an unease that comes when standing before one alone. The wind may be still, yet the space feels crowded, as if unseen figures have gathered just beyond sight to watch the meeting of stone and flesh. Some who have felt the vibration say it is not merely in the hand, but in the air around them, as though the hill itself is breathing with them, and that when they step away, there is a moment where the world feels slightly thinner, quieter before the ordinary sounds return. The elders of the villages do not encourage people to test the stones. They say the voice of the land is not a thing to summon for curiosity, that it speaks when it chooses, and not before they tell of a man generations ago, who camped by the stone at Terra, hoping to hear its roar. He stayed 3 nights. On the 3rd, at dawn the stone did speak, but not for him. The sound was so loud it rolled across the plain, startling the livestock, and sending birds into the sky. The man fled the hill and never returned. There's one more story, and it is the one most often told when the fire burns low and the room grows quiet. It is of a shepherd on the Scottish Isles, who found himself lost in heavy mist. He climbed a rise hoping to see the coast, but at the top he found a standing stone, one he had never seen before, though he knew the land well. It was smooth and tall, and in its face was a single groove worn deep. He placed his hand into the groove, and felt it fit perfectly, as if it had been shaped for him. A sound rose from within the stone, not a roar, not a hum, but something like a voice too deep to be understood. The mist closed around him, and when it lifted hours later, he was standing in a place he did not know. It took him 2 days to return home, and when he looked for the stone again, it was gone. Whether that stone had chosen him or warned him, no one could say, but from that time he would not walk the hills alone. And so the stones remain. The wind passes, the grass grows, and the seasons turn, but they endure untouched, unmoving, yet never truly still. And perhaps one day, when the air is right and the hand is true, one of them will speak again, and when it does, the voice will carry not just across the land, but through it to whatever lies beneath, waiting to rise. It begins in darkness, not the ordinary darkness of the city at night. This is deeper, heavier, a darkness lit only by fire. The streets are silent except for the low shuffle of sandaled feet and the faint clink of obsidian blades against the armor of warriors. Along the causeway, the air smells of resin and burning copal. Smoke drifts in thin ribbons, curling into the black sky where no stars are seen. The people kneel at the edges of the street, heads bowed low, their faces hidden. They do not speak. They do not look up. At the far end of the avenue, something moves. Torches rise and fall in slow rhythm, their light flickering against towering shapes. The statues are coming, carved from stone so dark it swallows the firelight. They stand twice the height of a man. Each one rests upon a wooden frame, carried by dozens of bearers. The god's face is fixed in a gaze that does not waver, the eyes set with discs of gold that reflect the torches and small, flickering suns. To some, it seems the statues move of their own will, the bearers nothing more than shadows following behind. The first is Huitzilopochtli, the god of sun and war. His head is crowned with a crest of feathers dyed red as fresh blood, his jaw set in a silent command. Beside him comes Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, his obsidian eyes gleaming in the firelight. Behind them follow Tlaloc of the Rains and Zip-Totec, the flayed one, his golden mask polished until it shines like the morning sun. One by one, they pass, their heavy forms swaying gently on the shoulders of the men beneath them. And the people bow lower still, for the gods are not to be met with mortal eyes when they walk. The sound that fills the air is not music, but something slower, the steady beat of a single drum. It echoes down the length of the street, each strike rolling through the stone beneath the knees of the people. The bearers move in time with it, step by step, never faltering. The priests walk beside the gods, their white robes marked with crimson, their faces streaked with paint. In their hands, they hold bowls of incense, the smoke rising in thick, sweet clouds that hide the feet of the statues as they pass. The procession moves toward the heart of the city, past the sleeping markets, past the empty courtyards, toward the great temple whose twin stairways rise high into the night. The people whisper of what will follow, though no one dares to speak above a breath. For when the gods walk, change comes. A new ruler crowned, an enemy marked for war, or a city abandoned to the jungle. No one knows which it will be, only that the choice is made before the night ends. At the base of the temple, the bearers set the statues down. Torches are planted in the earth around them, the flames throwing long shadows across the stone steps. The drumbeat stops. The silence that follows is heavy, pressing against the chest like a held breath. A priest steps forward, his hands raised toward the statues. His voice rises in a chant older than the city itself, the words shaped in a language no longer spoken by the people. Others join him, their voices weaving together until the sound is like wind moving through a canyon, deep, endless, impossible to trace to a single mouth. The firelight flickers against the gold eyes of the gods. For a moment, it seems the reflections move on their own. The people do not see stone now, but something watching them, something weighing them. There is no warning for what happens next. A gust of wind sweeps across the temple steps, scattering the smoke. The gold eyes flash. The crowd gasps. Not all of them can help it, for in that instant, the faces of the gods seem to change. The lips curve, the brows lower, and their gaze turns toward the assembled priests. The highest priest steps back as if struck. The chant falters, but only for a heartbeat before it resumes, stronger now, as if to hold back whatever has looked out from within the stone. Tomorrow will bring something new, and no one, not even the priests, will be able to deny it came from this night. The first light of morning creeps into the city not with the gentle warmth of an ordinary dawn, but with a strange coolness that clings to the air. The mist from the lake has drifted into the streets, wrapping the walls in pale veils, so that the shapes of temples and houses loom like ghosts from a dream. The people move quietly, as if still under the shadow of the night, just past their eyes drawn again and again toward the great temple, where the statues still stand unmoved from where they were set. The priests emerge first, their faces marked by the weariness of long hours, but their steps certain as they gather in the courtyard. The highest among them carries a folded cloth dyed deep red and bound with golden cord. None in the crowd dare to ask what lies within, for they know such objects are shown only when the gods have made their choice. The crowd grows as the sun lifts higher, but the mist does not leave. Instead, it coils low over the stones, curling around the feet of the statues, so that they seem to hover above the earth. A hush falls as the cloth is unbound. Inside rests a headdress heavy with feathers and gold, its design unmistakable, for it is the crown of a ruler. The name is spoken not by the high priest, but by a younger voice, one of the temple attendants, and when it is heard, a murmur moves through the gathered people, for the name belongs not to the eldest noble or the most seasoned warrior, but to a man few expected, a man who had spoken quietly in council and held no great wealth, yet the gods have chosen, and the choice cannot be challenged. The man himself is brought forward, his expression unreadable, though the tension in his shoulders betrays the weight that has just been laid upon him. He kneels before the statues, his head bowed low, and the headdress is set upon him, the gold catching what little light passes through the mist. For a moment the silence is complete. Then, from somewhere deep within the crowd, a cry rises, not of celebration, but of alarm. All eyes turn to see a small group pointing toward the lake beyond the causeway. Its waters are rippling as if stirred from below, though no wind touches its surface. Fishermen claim later that they saw something beneath the water that morning, a shadow longer than any canoe, moving slowly toward the city before sinking into the depths and vanishing. The priests do not speak of it, but the people remember, for in the days that follow the changes come swiftly. The markets close for reasons never spoken aloud. The temples call for offerings far greater than before, and small processions of priests move through the streets, carrying bowls of burning copal and speaking to no one. At night the statues remain outside the temple, their golden eyes turn toward the city. Some say they have shifted slightly, their gaze no longer fixed on the horizon, but angled downward, as if watching the people more closely than before. A merchant passing by after sundown swears he heard the faint sound of stone grinding against stone, though there was no wind and no hand touched them. A child claims to have seen one lift its head, though his parents hush him, quickly fearing the wrath such words might bring. Weeks pass under the same uneasy sky. The mists from the lake linger longer each morning, and the air grows heavy before storms that never break. Whispers spread in the market of villages beyond the causeway, found empty, their fires still burning, their food still warm, yet no sign of struggle, and no tracks leading away. Those who speak of it lower their voices, glancing toward the temple steps, where the gods stand, as if listening. The new ruler moves through the city with a guard of priests rather than warriors, his eyes distant, his words measured and few. One night the drumbeat returns, not the single slow rhythm of the great procession, but a sharper, faster pulse echoing across the water. The people wake to see torches moving along the causeway, yet there's no feast, no gathering of the crowd, only the silent movement of shapes carrying something toward the temple wrapped in cloth, and bound tight. What it is no one learns, for it disappears into the shadow of the statues, and by morning the cloth and the bearers are gone. Some begin to avoid the temple altogether, taking long paths around the streets that lead to it, claiming they feel the ground vibrate faintly beneath their feet when they pass too close. Others go willingly at night to kneel before the gods, their faces lit by torchlight, their lips moving in silent pleas. No one knows what bargains are made, only that the faces of those who leave are pale, and their eyes do not meet the eyes of others. Then comes the night, without the moon, the city lit only by the fires in the temple courtyard. The statues are carried away once more, but this time not through the main avenue. They are taken toward the lake, their reflections trembling in the black water. The bearers walk until the shore swallows their shapes, and the drumbeat fades into the distance. What happens beyond the mist no one sees, for the watchers are held back by a line of priests, their faces blank, their hands gripping obsidian blades. By dawn the statues have returned, what as if from rain, though the skies are clear, the mists are gone. The sun rises bright and hard over the city, yet the people feel no relief, for they know something has been set in motion, and whatever it is will not be turned aside. They say that on that morning the gold in the gods' eyes shone brighter than ever before, not with the glow of fire, but with the cold gleam of sunlight on deep water, and that those who stood too long before them felt the weight of that gaze like a hand upon their chest. In the years that follow the night, the gods' walk becomes a marker in every story told in the city, spoken of in low tones by the old and never in the hearing of priests, for it is understood that when the statues walk, they do not come only to bless, they come to claim. It begins with the sound of water against the hull. Cold, dark water lapping at the sides of a ship that will never sail again. The air smells of smoke and pine tar. The sky is heavy with clouds, low enough to swallow the sun. On the shore, men and women stand in silence, their furs pulled tight against the wind. At the center of their gathering lies a longship drawn onto the land, its hull blackened from years of salt and weather. This is no ordinary vessel. It is the final bed of a chieftain. The ship is lined with furs and silks, its bow adorned with carved dragons, whose eyes once stared into foreign seas. Gold and silver lie scattered among the planks, coins, goblets, arm rings, the weight of a lifetime's wealth. Weapons are placed beside the dead man, his sword laid across his chest, his shield at his side, the edge of his axe still sharp. Around him, other figures kneel in silence. They are not corpses, not yet. Some are servants, some warriors, some women whose faces are painted with ash. They are the living companions of the dead, bound to follow him into whatever world lies beyond. The air is still until the priestess steps forward. She wears a cloak of raven feathers, her hands marked with red paint, her eyes blackened with soot. Her voice carries over the wind in a chant that none but she understands. The warriors lift their horns and blow a single long note, deep and hollow, the sound rolling over the water like the call of some ancient beast. The ritual begins. Such burials were not rare among the Norse. Ship graves have been found in Norway, Sweden, and the windswept Orkney Islands, vessels drawn onto land or set aflame on the water, sending the dead on their final voyage. Sometimes the ship was buried whole, covered in earth to form a mound. Other times, it was given to the waves, its timbers burning until it sank beneath the sea. In the Oseberg ship burial, discovered in 1904, archaeologists found not only the remains of 2 women, one likely a queen, but also wagons, tapestries, animals, and finely crafted tools. It was not simply a grave, it was a statement. The dead did not depart empty-handed. But there are darker truths hidden in the soil of such tombs. In some graves, the remains show no signs of decay at the time of burial, the bones unmarked by the slow work of rot. It suggests that not all who lay beside the ruler were dead when the earth covered them. There are sagas, half forgotten, that speak of the last gift, the offering of life to honor the one who had passed. A life taken not by force, but by acceptance, given so that the dead would not walk alone. Far from the northern seas, another fire once marked the end of a life. In the great cities of the Ganges plain, the funeral pyres rose against the night sky. The smell of burning sandalwood mixed with the chant of priests, their words carried by the wind to the riverbank. Here, too, The dead were sent with care, their bodies wrapped in cloth, adorned with flowers, their journey guided by sacred rites. But in some places, in some centuries past, the ritual took a different form. The pyre did not hold only the dead. It held the living as well. The practice, known in later centuries as suttee, bound a widow's fate to that of her husband. In the most solemn of ceremonies, the woman would walk, or be carried, to the pyre, her hands clasped in prayer, her eyes fixed on some point beyond the fire. Those who witnessed it said the air grew strangely still in those moments, as though the world itself was holding its breath. There are accounts, whispered, never proudly told, of widows who trembled at the edge, whose cries were swallowed by the chanting until the flames took them. Archaeologists have uncovered funeral sites where such offerings are written not in words, but in the arrangement of bones. In the ancient steppe cultures of Central Asia, burial mounds known as kurgans have revealed the remains of warriors surrounded by horses, weapons, and women, all arranged as if in a frozen court, their positions deliberate, their deaths part of a single moment in time. One mound, open to the daylight after 2,000 years, showed the chieftain at the center, his hand still gripping the hilt of a sword, his companions lying at angles that suggested they had not been laid to rest gently. What binds these rituals across such distance and time is the belief that death is not the end but a passage. And in that passage, one should not travel alone. The treasures, the weapons, the servants, the animals, they were provisions for the road ahead, placed with the same care one might pack for a long voyage. Only in these journeys, the road was unseen, and the destination known only to the dead. On the shore, the Viking ship is ready. The priestess has finished her chant. The living offerings rise to their feet, some steady, others swaying, as if the weight of the moment presses their breath away. The warriors lift the ship on their shoulders, carrying it toward the water's edge. The tide waits, dark and still. They push until the keel finds the deep, the ship rocking gently as it takes to the waves. Torches are thrown, flames racing along the tarred wood. The wind catches, and the fire climbs the dragon's head, turning its carved eyes into pools of molten gold. The watchers do not move. They stay until the ship is no more than a distant flame upon the horizon. And when that flame finally dies, the wind returns, cold, sharp, and empty. The days after the great burning on the shore are quiet, but the quiet is not peace, it is the stillness of something that has been taken from the world and sent elsewhere. The people speak softly in the longhouse, the warriors polish weapons, without laughter the women mend nets without song, and at night the only sound is the wind pushing against the walls of the sleeping hall, as if searching for a way. Inside, the priestess walks alone through the settlement, her cloak of raven feathers dragging in. The dirt, her eyes fixed on the place where the ship vanished into the horizon. She says nothing, yet those who pass her turn away, for they feel the weight of her gaze, and the smell of smoke seems to follow her like a shadow. Far to the east, across rivers and mountains, the steppe lies wide and endless beneath a pale sky. A burial mound rises from the flat earth, its sides, weathered by centuries of wind. The grass grows uneven across its surface, hiding the shape of what lies beneath. When the mound is cut open, the air inside is cold. The soil, holding the breath of winters long gone. Within is the chamber of a warrior chief, his body dressed in thick felt, his head crowned with gold. Beside him lie horses still wearing bridles, set with bronze plates, their bodies curled as if sleeping. Around them are women with hair plaited and hands folded at their chests, their bones unbroken, their faces turned toward the chief as though awaiting a command. There is no sign of struggle, no shattered bone, no defensive wound. It is as if they lay down in the dark and closed their eyes, knowing they would never open them again. In one corner a wooden chest holds weapons polished to a dull shine, and in another a stack of bowls, still bearing traces of grain and meat, the offerings meant for a journey that could not be measured in days or seasons. The archaeologists who uncovered the mound speak in low voices about the strange marks on the inner walls. Carvings of birds in flight and men with arms outstretched as if reaching for something beyond the earth. They cannot say whether the carvings were meant to guide the dead or to bind them within. In the jungles of the Yucatan, a different kind of offering lies hidden beneath stone temples. Here the Maya built tombs for their kings deep within the pyramids, sealing them away Behind walls of limestone, the chambers are filled with jade masks carved to match the face of the dead, their green stone eyes staring into the darkness. Beside the rulers lie young attendants, their skeletons arranged as if in mid-bow, their spines curved, their skulls lowered in eternal reverence. In some cases, traces of cinnabar powder stain the bones a red, so vivid it looks fresh even after 1,000 years, and in the stillness of those chambers the air feels thick, as though holding the last breath of those who were sealed away. Across the seas, in the high valleys of the Himalayas, there are sky burials, where the bodies of the dead are left upon mountain slopes for the vultures to take. Yet in rare cases, the offering is not only the dead, but the living. Monks tell of old kings who ascended the slopes with wives and servants, all walking in silence, until they reached the appointed place, the wind howling through the passes. There they sat together in a circle, their eyes closed, their hands resting on their knees, waiting for the world to fall away in the thin air. And when the sun rose the next day, only the bones remained scattered among the stones. Each of these final offerings speaks of a belief too deep to be broken by fear, that the journey beyond death demands company, and that the living can step willingly into that shadow for the sake of another. But there are graves that tell a more unsettling story, graves where the evidence suggests the offering was not willing at all. In the sands of the desert, a tomb is found with a ruler at its center, his body wrapped in gold cloth, his face hidden beneath a mask of beaten copper. Around him are figures whose wrists are bound with cord, the bones of their hands pressed tightly together, as if still straining against the ties. Their mouths are open in shapes that could have been the last cry or the final breath. The wind that sweeps across such places carries more than dust, it carries the weight of all those endings, the sound of fire on the water, the silence of earth closing over the living, the thin air of the mountains where the cold takes breath away. And it is said that in some villages where these customs once ruled, the ground still remembers. There are fields where crops will not grow, patches of earth where no bird lands, and when the moon is high and the air is still, the people say they hear footsteps moving toward the river or the mound or the temple, though no one walks there anymore. On the shore where the Viking ship was given to the fire, the priestess stands alone at dusk, the last light spilling red across the water. She holds in her hand a small carved figure, blackened at the edges from the heat of the pyre. It is the likeness of the man who was sent across the waves, the lines of his face etched deep into the wood. She sets it into the water and watches as it drifts out into the dark, the tide carrying it slowly away until it is no more than a shadow upon the waves. And as the sun sinks, the wind turns cold, and the water begins to move in slow, deliberate ripples, as though something beneath has reached up to take it. The next morning the beach is empty except for the faint outline of footsteps leading from the tide line toward the settlement. The prints are deep, as though left by someone carrying great weight, and though the villagers search, no one can find where they end.